It's also like a reflection from the whole conference, and it's this weird omission of or the assumption which you alluded to, that the body does not implicate gender. But what we've heard in this conference, for mostly, is cisgendered, cis-bodied people talking about gender and implicating gender on cis bodies. I don't think I have heard voices from transsexual people talking about how that plays with masculinity or femininity or other types of genders. And I think, you know, for me, it's, when we talk about binaries and going beyond the binaries, what would be interesting is to try and complicate the discussion a little bit further and not be so, what I think somebody said the other day, we were too polite. Like, just take it out there and take it to the places where gender doesn't want to go to, and see what happens. So, I mean, speaking from a South African perspective, you know, the category third gender does not exist for us. The category transgender exists, the category transsexual exists, and that is always put on the margins. It's invisibilized in so many ways, through violence, through the state, etc. To the extent that when I see transgender people here in this conference, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of odd, because a lot of transgender people, as you mentioned, are being put here as a spectacle. They're just here for the entertainment. Maybe differently from this, in this panel, but this is what I've seen, and I think, oh, thank goodness, then in South Africa we don't have this.
I think, I mean, that's quite a provocative thing to say, because I wonder how transgender folk who are present in the conference space would respond to that, because from one perspective there is a certain fetishization in the entire thing of entertainment. At the same time, what if that is the space from where transgender folk are, through their own agency, expanding the possibilities of gender imagination in this space? I mean, I don't think we should have this conversation without one of the beautifully performative transgender people participating in it. I think that would be unfair. I've got several questions for all of you, but I think it's time to open it out to the audience. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Keenan Russell. I'm a trans male activist, and I actually kind of want to respond to the thing that you're talking about here. The invisibility of trans identities in this conference is repugnant. I feel unbelievably marginalized in a space where I expected to be accepted and discussed with my inclusion, and instead am being discussed around. And I also want to hit really quickly on something. I'm sorry, I can't see your name panel. Ashke, what's the name of it? Shanika. The way that you conceptualized choice, I think, again, further marginalizes transsexual and transgender identities, because for me and for most of the transgender individuals that I know, transition is not a choice. I'm choosing between transition and death. It's not between transition and not transition. And putting the choice language on it, I think, comes from a place of cis privilege. Being able to say that it is a choice to participate in one way or another is something that is only allowed to cis individuals or to post-transition individuals. But pre-transition, there was no choice. I barely made it to the point where I was able to transition. So I'd like to encourage you to rethink that use of that word, because I think it's quite inappropriate when talking about trans people without their presence in the conversation.
Yeah. So this was for Chainika. When you started off talking about sexual identity and gender expression, and how unfortunate it can be when T is collapsed with LGB. But isn't there a paradox here? Because December we had a verdict which recriminalizes sexual choice, and then in April we have another verdict which talks about free expression of gender. So in Calcutta, the Pride Walk, the theme was sexual identity is not complete without gender expression. So is there a paradox there? That's the first question. And second is generally for the whole panel, is within feminist spaces, I often sense a lot of discomfort when it comes to the performativity of trans identities, something which Akshay was also talking about just right now. So for instance, every year before the Pride, there are strong debates within feminist spaces about how when transgender persons dress up quote-unquote flamboyantly within the Pride, that takes away from the issue because it focuses on the face and not the issue. So the focus is not on the slogan, but on the face. And that is how media starts commoditizing the whole issue. So is that a very limiting debate within women's rights groups?
We'll take one more and then do response and then get to you. This one.
जी मेरा नाम किरण है और मेरा सवाल रेशमा जी से है कि मुझे ये कहना था कि आप कह रहे थे कि हिजरा कम्युनिटी जो है उनको मतलब पैसे की कमी होती है और पैसे के लिए वो ये करते हैं, तो फिर पैसा ही आप ये सब पैसा ही मायने रखता है उनके लिए या फिर उनका लिंग भाव भी मायने रखता है?
नहीं, मैं ये बात नहीं कही हूँ। एक बार आपको समझना पड़ेगा कि मैं ये कह रही थी कि जो ट्रांसजेंडर आइडेंटिटी है भारत में, वो इसी पहचान से संबोधित होती है, जो कि ये पहचान जहाँ तक है कि प्रोफेशनली मतलब हम कहीं ना कहीं अगर बधाई मंगती या कहीं न जाते हैं तो इस चीज को लेकर के जाते हैं कि हम ब्लेसिंग देने जा रहे हैं और हमें कुछ मिलेगा या ऐसा कुछ होगा। मैं इस चीज को ये कर रही हूँ कि ये समाज की नज़र में ये प्रोफेशनल आइडेंटिटी है, इस आइडेंटिटी को ट्रांसजेंडर आइडेंटिटी के साथ इस तरीके से नहीं जोड़ा जाना चाहिए कि हाँ मेरी पहचान हिजड़ा ही आइडेंटिटी है। मैं अगर मैं जिस प्रोफेशन में हूँ वो मेरी आइडेंटिटी होनी चाहिए, इसकी बात मैं कह रही थी किरण जी। ठीक है, थैंक यू।
Firstly, Keenan, I'm extremely sorry. I don't ever use the word choice. What I mean is that it is critical. If somebody does not feel the body matches their gender, it is critical for them to get transition. I'm not using the word choice, and I, in fact, stand by people who want to make that transition and who want to do that change in the body. And I feel that every possible care should be provided so that that is made feasible. And I'm definitely not speaking of it in the way that the language of choice has been used in feminisms. I'm not doing it like that. As far as the question of gender identity and sexual orientation goes, I think that the conflation, both the Supreme Court judgments actually cannot be a marker of how we think, because both these judgments, in their own ways, have neither understood sexual orientation or gender identity. So I wouldn't take them as, telling us that there is a connection between the two. I do see sex, sexuality, and gender, and we're not talking about intersex issues here right now, but I think that they all are contingent on each other, and yet they have independent meanings for each of our lives. And so in that sense, they have to be separated while they may work together. And when the LGBTIQ, whatever, that whole thing comes together, it is against the very dominant heterosexual model of expression of gender and sexuality that exists in society. And I'm meaning the dominant heterosexual model. As far as the other question goes, I think that if I'm not mistaken, in Bombay, the queer march, the Queer Azadi March, has had much more discussion on what is adequate, what are the kinds of clothes that people should wear in the march. And they have commented on people's clothes much more than what the feminist groups have done. So I think that this is a critique, yes, that how do we look at expressions and transgressive expressions of any kind when we are trying to fight for our rights and we want to become one like everybody else? Or from the feminist point of view, that if you want to project issues and not project something else, we don't want to be read as something else. And for a long time within the women's movements, this has been a debate, that if we raise lesbian issues, then we become identified as lesbian or anti-men, and so we don't want to raise it. So these are old stories. But the debate of what is it that we want to project has been something that has been there everywhere, and it has to be critically looked at everywhere. Because there's no way in which we are going to fight or move in the struggle unless we allow for all transgressions. Unless we take transgressions as part of being, there's no way that we can move ahead. There's no sanity that we can present, the clean, clear picture that we can give.
Dethi, would you like to reflect on or respond to either Keenan or?
Yeah, no, I mean, Keenan, I agree with your point. I think that's what I was trying to say, actually.
If I could,
But I can-
if I could take that conversation further, what exactly does cis mean? What are the assumptions underlying the use of the word cis, C-I-S, cisgender?
But if you come from South Africa, it's cis. S-I-E-S. No, I'm joking. That was a joke.
If you could clarify, I mean, because it confuses me in the sense that it has it generates a new binary of the cis and the trans. Where does the queer, what space does the queer occupy in a world of cis and trans? If you could explain that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because I don't use this term myself. I just, I know it's used a lot when you're trying to actually differentiate between different groups of people. But I mean, I stand corrected, and maybe there are more people. There are people who have expertise in this area. But cisgender people are people who are born with their gender, and they stick to it, and that gender goes with their. Their body goes with their gender. So that's a simple version. Cisgender is yeah. So you could be, I don't know what you are. So a lot of people could be cisgender. Maybe none of us are. I don't know. But it is the most. It is for many people. It's always the elephant in the room. That it just makes these assumptions that everybody is the same.
The way that we use cis and trans, and I will also respond to Akshay in doing that. I don't think that the body decides cisgender or transgender, because whatever be my body, my gender could be chosen. I mean, my felt gender could be anything. So when somebody says that I am a man, it is society that has assigned male or female, and that person says I'm a man. So a person who's assigned gender female at birth, but says that I'm not a woman, I'm a man, is then a trans person, in my understanding. And if I feel my gender matches with the assigned gender, then I'm a cisgender person. It has nothing to do with the body, in my understanding. So I could have whatever body, but the assigned gender is what I'm choosing for myself, or what I feel from within. And if somebody feels another gender than the assigned, then they are transgender. That's the broad binary classification. There can be queer people there can be queerness within cisgender also, because it is not about feeling comfortable in the way that man or woman is defined in society. Nobody maybe here in this room feels comfortable being man and woman as defined by society. So each of us is doing our own gender battles. Gender battles are not attributed only to people who would come under this broad category of transgender, and they're not taken away from the cisgender category as well, because my way of understanding man or woman could be very different from societal understanding of being man and woman. But it's just that the distinction of assignment also is something that we're making because people that we speak to say that I was never a woman, right? And other people might say that she was born a girl, but she is a man now. That's not the language that we hear people taking for themselves. If they are man from whenever they remember. And there are some people who might have claimed an identity later, but there are many who feel this gender fits them from the time that they're born, and it's absolutely not necessary that there has to be something, that is a problem with their body, and there's no such conception of the body. And when it comes to intersex persons, they could also be cisgender and transgender in this definition.
ये साइकोलॉजिकल कंफर्मेशन की बात हो रही है ना, किस तरीके से हम अपने जेंडर को लेकर के ये होते हैं। तो ये कभी ऐसा होता है कि अगर कोई लड़की, अगर मेरे घर में मतलब 2 लड़कियां हैं, तो मुझे पालने की बात आती है, तो मैं उस फीमेल बाय द जेंडर को मैं एक बेटे के रूप में पालने का कभी ना कभी मतलब पितृत्व के रूप में पालने का प्रयास कभी ना कभी किया ही जाता है और कहा जाता है, मतलब बहुत सारे ऐसे ये में। लेकिन कभी ऐसा होता है कि अगर कोई बच्चा इस तरीके से ट्रांस आइडेंटिटी में, विद इन ट्रांस वुमन आइडेंटिटी में, तो क्या कभी समाज या लोग इस बारे में सोचते हैं कि उसे हम अपने बेटे को बेटी के रूप में पालेंगे? ये मैस्कुलिनिटी का सबसे बड़ा सवाल है कि ये मैस्कुलिनिटी इस चीज़ को स्वीकार नहीं करती है, जबकि फेमिनिटी इस चीज़ को स्वीकार कर लेती है कि हाँ, हम अपने बच्ची को बेटा बना करके पालेंगे और मैं उनको बेटा मानूंगी और मैं बेटी की तरह से। लेकिन कभी ऐसा होता है कि ट्रांस बॉयज़ को लेकर के कभी इस तरीके का ओपन माइंडेड नहीं होता है।
Okay, I'm questioning the whole word of trans. So the moment we use the word trans, this is also my question to Reshma, and also having worked with the community, that we are again showing the hegemony of the binaries. And the moment the word third gender is used, और उसको मान लेने का माने ये है कि हम first gender क्यों नहीं हैं और हम third में क्यों आए, कि ये बाइनरी का जो हेजेमनी है इसको हम मान के चल रहे हैं. वी आर अग्रीइंग विद दैट. सो this is a word I'm questioning altogether, and also the word queer in the sense that what is so queer about what I want to do with myself, where is the queerness about? So this whole issue of semantics that we are stuck with, उसके जगह मैं कोती वर्ड को ज़्यादा यूज़ करना चाहती हूँ अपने लिए कभी कभी, क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि कोती इज़ नॉट गिविंग मी अ ट्रांस आइडेंटिटी. टिपिकली कोती भाषा को अगर आप लेते हैं, मैं कुछ और ही हूँ, मैं इधर से उधर या उधर से इधर नहीं आ रही हूँ. सो आई जस्ट वांटेड टू फ्लैग दिस.
लेकिन मार्जिनलाइज
I'm very much disturbed by this video you showed. And if homosexuality is part of the indigenous cultures of Africa, South Africa particularly, and is it the way we say post-colonial, is it a post-apartheid reaction to the fact of denial of it and also the extreme marginalization of it? And I do also express my serious concern of Tina, as well as yours, and it is a very serious issues of killings and intoleration in the society. So could you also a little bit, therefore, explain, since we are not part of your society, explain this Yuvalet priestess's approach to life, that the priestesses you showed in the video, her approach to life. Just can you a little bit more expand on it?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I think मुझे लगता है कि ये जो चर्चा है कहीं थोड़ी सी अटक गई है और फंस गई है, क्योंकि एक सवाल है कि हम किस तरह से अपने आप को पहचान देते हैं, अपने आप को समझते हैं, दूसरा एक राजनैतिक सोच और विचार का सवाल है, और तीसरा नॉमेनक्लेचर, जिससे कई लोग बड़े डिस्कम्फर्टेड हैं. तो जब कोई मुझे लगता है कि हम मतलब अगर हम खुद को कोई भी पहचान दें, चाहे वो एक्सिस पहचान हो, चाहे वो ट्रांस पहचान हो, चाहे वो कूथी पहचान हो, ये कहना मुझे थोड़ा सा अजीब लगता है कि ट्रांस पहचान से प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट होती है, क्योंकि बहुत सारे लोग हैं और बोल भी चुके हैं इस जगह पर जो जिनके लिए वो अहमियत रखती है. जहाँ तक क्वेयर होने का सवाल, मुझे लगता है कुछ लिव्ड रियलिटीज़ हैं और कुछ एक सोचने का तरीका है. तो अगर हम हेट्रोनॉर्मेटिव जो कंस्ट्रक्शंस हैं और जो डोमिनेंट डिस्कोर्सेस हैं उसके बाहर जी रहे हैं, उसके अंदर अपनी पहचान नहीं पा रहे हैं, या वहाँ पे हम मार्जिनलाइज हो रहे हैं, तो फिर एक तो वो एक तरीका होता है क्वेयर को समझने की. और जहाँ तक सिस और ट्रांस स्टार की बात है, तो मैं चैनिका के साथ सहमत हूँ, और मुझे कहना चाहिए कि मैं उस स्टडी की को ऑथर हूँ जिसकी बात वो कर रही हैं, कि हमने जिस तरह से समझा है कि आप जब पैदा होते हैं, आपके माँ बाप या जो भी हैं इर्द गिर्द, वो आपको एक जेंडर देते हैं, मतलब एक नाम देते हैं जिसके साथ एक जेंडर सामाजिक तौर पे जुड़ा हुआ है. और अगर आप बड़े होते वक्त अपने आप को उस जेंडर में नहीं खुद को समझते हैं, तो आप सिस नहीं हैं, आप ट्रांस स्टार. एक अम्ब्रेला टर्म जो दुनिया में यूज़ हो रहा है उसे हमने भी अपनाया है, ये समझने के लिए कि ये एक सच्चाई है. ये this is your felt reality, this is your lived reality, this is the reality you try to express when you are able to, or you, as Keenan said, maybe you die, you're very in danger of dying sometimes, or all kinds of traumas happen when you're not allowed to express that. But being queer is, well, you're queer because you are, and queer is a word that has been reclaimed. So yeah, sure, what's so queer about what I want to do? But then, this is again, I think we're reopening an old debate, which is okay to do perhaps, but yeah, we're queer because we're, everyone, you can object to it, but then, this is like the straight world which has not entered the discourse saying, why do you call yourselves queer, for heaven's sake? And you say, come on now, thoda homework karke aao, fir baat karo. So, but queer as a political outlook is questioning the dominant and questioning questioning those dominant discourses. And so you could be a queer ally. There are different definitions of how you consider yourself queer in your outlook, in your politics, and queer in your being. And sometimes the two might come together, sometimes they may not completely come together. We shouldn't, I think assigning any kind of fixity to any of these is a problem, or any kind of sort of embargoes on, well, this is it and that isn't. But if I'm a person, I was assigned gender female at birth, I think of myself as a woman. In my own feminist ways, I may question dominant notions of woman, but yeah, I have cis privilege, and I acknowledge that. And I can't suddenly say I'm a trans person, but I'm not precluding the possibility that I might discover about myself, although it's rare that should happen so late in life, and that, yeah, actually I don't feel, I think I'm not very comfortable with this identity of woman, and perhaps I've been closeted about it or something, so I should have the freedom to find another, choose another, confess another, admit another, whatever you want to call it. So in that sense, choice also, I do want to also reinforce what Chanika said. I really think that, because I'm also coming from the same space of the work we did together, it really is, I think what we have very, very emphatically said is that the body is central, but it is not, you cannot make a sort of you cannot judge a person's transness only by their desire to change. But if the desire to change is there, then nobody else has a right to say that, well, that's not really necessary. So I think that was the point. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for taking so long.
Yeah, I want to suggest something because normally people saying those words, sometimes gay, transgender, men, women, feminism, some words. I think we all are human beings. When you have sex with a female, we can say I'm heterosexual. When I sex with a male, I can say I'm a gay. People one day establish those words because politics, and you have feel human sexuality, feelings, natural feelings, whenever you want. Don't think, I think we can't think those about those words, transgender or transsexuality or whatever it is. Those are words people using for getting some benefits. One day they establish those words. Listen music, dance very well. We can live this society free of charge actually. We can breathe smell. Respect others' identity, respect other feelings. Don't discriminate people because of their some kind of things. So I want to say those things.
Unfortunately, I think we are actually a little beyond time. Just 1 minute each, if you've got any final reflections or anything to add. 1 minute में अगर आप आखिरी कुछ कहना चाहें, क्योंकि अब टाइम खत्म हो रहा है.
Yes, जैसा कि टीना जी ने बोला कि मैं कोती अगर कहूँ तो कहीं ना कहीं इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव में अभी जो ये दिया हुआ है उसको लेकर के आइडेंटिटी बेस पे, तो हमें अभी के बेस में जिस ट्रांसजेंडर आइडेंटिटी को कहाँ पे ये करना है तो वो थर्ड जेंडर में ही लेकर के जाते हैं, लेकिन सोसाइटी हमें क्या ये देती है उसको लेकर के थोड़ा सा सोचना है और उस पे ये करना है कि ये ट्रांसजेंडर आइडेंटिटी जो है वो डेप्थ में ना जाए, हिज आइडेंटिटी ही नहीं फेसिंग हो, इसको लेकर के नहीं.
Final words?
Okay. So my final word is to say thanks to this panel. I found myself very lost in translation most of the time, particularly because the context in India sounds very different from what I have experienced in the past, well, for many years, including issues around gender and sexuality. So that's been just an interesting observation. I do want to take your offer, and to your question, but I will do that afterwards. But some of the work that we do, that Fikile, in the video that you've seen, that we're trying to do in South Africa is to reinsert, well, it's kind of a disgusting word. We don't really want to insert anything, but is to reclaim and I suppose appropriate what has been taken away from us. And part of that is the idea that we are not African, and so the work is trying to reclaim what it really means to be African, because Africa itself has billions of people, and different types of people, and non-conforming communities, gender non-conforming communities, sexual non-conforming communities are part and parcel of what it means to be African. So we're claiming that, and we're claiming the many traditions that make us believe that we should not exist. The tradition of being a healer, for example, which is something that non-conforming people cannot access, like people in like a third gender in India. Like, there's no way anyone could ever think of me as a healer. I would have to do something really, like go to the bush and do all kinds of rituals to be able to get there. So it cannot be just given to me because of how I present in the world. So this is the kind of work that we're trying to do, is to, how do we speak back to cultural hegemony, to all kinds of things that try to push us back, push us out of Africa, because we're being pushed out. I don't know where we're going to go. Hopefully you will take us in India. That would be great. Sorry? Thank you, yeah.
I just have a couple of things to say. I think language is a very, very political thing. And I don't think we can run away from saying that I don't agree with this term and I don't agree with that term. One. Two, I also think that we've learned over years that, saying man does not include everybody. Saying gender does not include all genders. You have to underline. You have to underline where the difference is, but you also don't want to make a spectacle of the difference. And so you also make a spectacle of the mainstream. And I think that cis came in response from the trans community, that those who are not transgender are also something. They are also making a choice, or they are comfortable, they are choosing the same gender as that they were assigned, and that automatically gives them certain privilege. How that plays out in life depends on various other things, which we said that gender is a function of many things, so it does not directly play out. But yes, there is a connection between this being cisgender and privilege at some level. And so naming privilege, I think for me the lessons came from, again, Dalit feminists, who said that, acha, tumhara feminism and ours is Dalit feminism. No, yours is Brahminical feminism, yours is caste feminism, ours is Dalit feminism. So I think that naming the privileged is as much important, and that's why heterosexual is being named, that's why straight is being given, that's why cisgender is being given. And I don't think that we should run away from it. Those are our privileges. We've managed to say man and woman at some point. We have to say other things. And I do think language is very, very political.
I'm from a cricket playing country and couldn't take that. I'm going to end with highlighting what we haven't done and what we have done this afternoon. I think similar to the way Zethu was talking about the presence of transgender bodies and Keenan's point as well. There's the visibility and invisibility of queer bodies more broadly in this space. And I think what has happened is in this session is that, well, once again, the queer or the trans or the sexually diverse, gender diverse body has attempted to demonstrate the complexity through which gender is political, through which sexuality is political, not for simply occupying a space for recognition, oh, we are angry or we are victims, but rather to instigate that kind of thinking, that kind of recognition of the complexity of gender and sexuality in what is being framed as cis. So if we take the margin and the mainstream, however problematic that frame is, the idea is for the mainstream to look at the margin and recognize its own peculiarity, recognize that it has itself gone through a process of naturalization which somehow places it beyond politics. And in some sense, that is the challenge before the field of masculinity studies, interventions around masculinity, is to demonstrate, is to expose the processes through which certain forms of masculinity are naturalized, are normalized, and therefore become norms, therefore become the expectations, and therefore structure the political economy. I think we'll stop there. Thank you all for attending. Hope you all enjoyed this session. Thanks.
And welcome back to the second plenary of today, which is the dialogue with the women's movements. As you can see, we have a very exciting lineup, and the discussion will be chaired. There's an error in the program book, not by Dean Peacock, but by Srilata Batliwala from AVID, and she will be introducing herself shortly. I just want to remind everyone that at the end of the session, There will be an announcement regarding the evening. You're all aware we have a cultural program lined up for you starting at 7:30. Please stay in the hall for the announcement because there are some travel logistics that will be announced at the end of this plenary. Srilata, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I have some good news and some bad news. Which would you like first? Okay, the good news is that this plenary is going to be quite different from what you might have anticipated. And we're trying to do something a little different from perhaps what the program suggests. So rather than the bulk of the time being given over to our panelists, we are going to actually give the bulk of the time to the audience to participate in this process. Loud applause. Okay, the bad news is that this is not actually going to be a dialogue with women's movements. It's going to be a session in which we are going to try and generate the agenda for such a dialogue in the longer term, so that we go out of this room with a set of questions and issues that we feel are really critical to advance such a dialogue and frame such a dialogue. And I think in the 1.5 hours that we have, rather than we as panelists having a dialogue with each other and simulating that dialogue, it would be better if we could open up space for you to contribute to framing the agenda and then taking forward this dialogue in your different locations and contexts with the women's movements that you engage with or don't engage with. Does that sound like a good idea? Okay. Thank you for your assumed consensus on the change of program. So I'll start by asking my panelists to introduce themselves very briefly, a couple of sentences each. Binz, can I ask you to start?
Thank you. My name is Binz Governors. I'm a Namibian lawyer, but currently special advisor to the Minister of Health and Social Services. I served for 8 years as Commissioner for 9 years as Commissioner for Social Affairs at the African Union. I'm not going to go into any other thing but to say I have been part and parcel of the liberation struggle that brought the independence to my country. And I did that as a woman. I did that as a woman participating in the liberation struggle. And I guess that has always been my agenda and will continue to be my agenda. I'm really glad to be here and to be part of this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Umadi?
I'm Uma Chakravarti. I taught in a college for many, many years. I've been associated with the women's movement and the movement for democratic rights.
Hi, I'm Gloria Cariaga from Mexico. I'm a social psychologist. I'm a teacher at the National University of Mexico. And I'm an active feminist and LGBTI rights.
Good afternoon. I'm Dean Peacock. I am the co-chair of the Men Engage Alliance, and I work at Sonke Gender Justice in South Africa. I have been doing work on militarization, masculinities, HIV and AIDS, and social justice for the last nearly 30 years. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues and comrades, and fantastic to be here with my incredible team of colleagues and comrades from South Africa. I couldn't work with a more committed, passionate group of people. So thank you very, very much.
I am Juan Guillermo Figueroa from Mexico. I am a philosopher. I began working on reproductive health and reproductive behavior 35 years ago. I began working with feminists 25 years ago. I began working with men 20 years ago. And I have been trying to understand the relation between the three areas of my main concerns. Thank you.
So, putting the donkey last, I'm Srilata Batliwala. I'm a lifelong feminist, spent my first 20 years as a grassroots activist, and the last 20 years trying to make sense of that activism and link it to theory and build some new thinking around these issues. So let's begin. What I'm going to do is ask my co-panelists to address the question in exactly 5 minutes. And when your 5 minutes are up, I'm going to clap. The question is, what would you put on the agenda for a dialogue with women's movements if you come from other social movements? And for Umadi and myself, the question will be, what would women's movements put on the agenda for a dialogue with other social and political movements? Now, these are the same questions that I'm asking you to consider, depending on which sort of movement location you choose. So we'll begin with the panel and then open it up to you. And what we're going to do is start with interventions from this section, then the middle section, and then that section on my left. So let's begin with Juan. Juan, what would you like to see on the agenda for a dialogue with women's movements? What do you think are the burning issues? And I might request you to try and frame it in terms of, we need to talk with each other about this. Okay?
Well, let me tell you in 5 minutes some of my ideas. First of all, I want to tell you that I used to think and talk in Spanish. So I will try to think a little bit in English and try to express myself in that language. I divided my answer in 2 areas. The main resistance that I have found when discussing with feminists, I would like to put it in the agenda. And second, a set of questions for feminists. I have found when doing some research and some activism in reproductive behavior, a resistance because some feminists have told me that I am using feminist categories with men. For example, reproductive rights, paternal mortality, that is one of my areas of research, safe fatherhood, and meaning of giving life, that is normally used related with women, and I used to talk about that related with men. So my first suggestion is discussing together how are these feminists, how are these categories used in relation with men. The second resistance that I have found is that I have been called a cynic or a coward when talking about reproductive rights for men, because some people have told me that is it not possible to demand rights for men when we have so many privileges. The third thing is that I have received a criticism that because there is not a men's movement demanding reproductive rights, it is meaningful to use this category related with men. The fourth resistance is that I have heard a lot of times that men don't need affirmative actions since their social vulnerability is a little bit artificial. So I would like to discuss about it. No? And the fifth one, the resistance that I have identified, is that I have received a big criticism that lots of men are not empathic with women as the otherness, no? As the other, in a sense that we have been silent in a lot of sense. And just, I have received a lot of comments that our silence as men is a way of complicity, without discussing if it is a chosen silence or if it is an imposed silence. with this reference, I have 5 questions for my colleagues, of my feminist friends and colleagues. The first one is, have you learned something or anything at all when talking to men? Second one, which are the limits that you yourself identify of feminists when trying to analyze and work with men? Is it enough feminist for working with men? The third one, do you think that you understand men's silences? Is there any possibility of misunderstanding men's silences? The fourth one, are you interested in understanding men's experiences? No? Or is just the need that the men have to understand women's necessities and then act in relation with that? The next one, how do you name the violence experienced by men in different grounds? I have had a lot of discussions with feminists, and they told me that is not gender violence. The gender violence is the one that men exercise against men. Okay, if that is the definition, how can we understand and name the violence that men are using? And the last one, I read an article in an English book that is called To Be or Not to Be a Man. And they put as a subtitle, that is the feminist question. I don't agree with that subtitle. I want to suggest, and I want to ask the feminists, is that the feminist question? Thank you.
Dean, please.
So, if the question is, what do we need to talk about? I think one of the things we need to talk about is nuance, is complexity. I think we fall too easily into a problematic binary of talking about a men's movement and a women's movement. I don't think either of those things exist in very easy ways, and I certainly don't think that the organizations represented here under the roof of the Men Engage Alliance represent a men's movement. We are very clear at Sonke Gender Justice, where I work, that we are not a men's organization. The minute we use that terminology, I think we align ourselves and get aligned with conservative, anti-feminist backlash organizations. So I think, if you look at the Men Engage statement of principles, we're very clear that this is not an alliance for those kinds of organizations. Our organization at Sonke is like many of the organizations that make up the Men Engage Alliance, organizations that are filled with men and women working together for gender justice, for gender transformation. We don't define our work narrowly as work for gender equality. It's certainly for gender equality, but we think work is about gender justice, about gender transformation. It's fundamentally about transforming the gender norms that restrict women and men in different ways, but harmful ways nonetheless. So I think there's a need for real complexity and a recognition that there isn't a neat divide down the middle of the work that happens with men and boys for gender equality and women's rights work. I think we need a new vocabulary. So the organization I work with, 120 staff working across 20 countries in Africa, we have men and women at every level of the organization. We have a standing commitment to our board of directors being made up of 50% women's rights organizations. And we work on everything from decriminalization of sex work to projects that target and work with male, traditional, and religious leaders. Are we able to call ourselves a women's rights organization? I would argue we can. We are not a historically women-led organization, although even that's complicated, because the founding chair of our board is a woman, Shamala Wilson. So I think the neat divisions that we impose on ourselves and that get imposed get in the way of the potential for working together to address the broad range of urgent issues that we have to address. So the conversation about accountability is critical at this juncture, but I think there are lots of conversations that have to happen in parallel with that about how we work together strategically to address militarism, to challenge liberalism, to demand state accountability, that governments fulfill their obligations to gender justice, to implementing the many, many, many commitments the governments have made to address gender-based violence. So I think sometimes our nomenclature and our vocabulary gets in the way of some of the urgent work that we have to do. I think there is lots of ground, and I think question that persistently comes up and that I think sits in the middle of this room, the elephant in the room in the discussion, is the question about resources. And together with some of our colleagues, and certainly AWID has done some great work on this, I think we should be able to see that the question is not so much, are the organizations, admittedly organizations that are more complicated and more complex than is sometimes presented to be the case, that do gender justice work with men and boys, do those organizations represent a significant drain on the resources for women's rights work? And I think if we look at AWID's report, the Watering the Leaves report, if we look at some of the ODA analysis that's coming out of the OECD, for instance, what we see is a very problematic trend in terms of, in some ways, the globalization and the neoliberalization of donor assistance. The big money is going elsewhere for gender work. It's going to the big international NGOs. It's increasingly going to private sector corporations. And I think we need to have a frank conversation amongst ourselves about how we push back against that, not how we fight each other for gender justice resources. In South Africa, and I'll close with this example, we were part of a bid. Big international NGO invited us and a number of women's rights organizations and other South African organizations to join a very large bid to do work in the intersection of gender-based violence and HIV. We joined the bid. We were all excited to hear the good news. We had won the bid. And then we were informed that we had been excluded from the implementation team, that in fact the money was going to go to this large international NGO that has 2 quite large buildings in Washington and KPMG. And that
Dean,
was for,
your time's up.
Thank you. $1 in $125 million that is simply bypassing local civil society organizations. So I think we've got a conversation to have about how we think differently about resource mobilization and challenge where the resources are going, because fighting amongst each other over those, I don't think serves our collective interest well. Thank you.
Well, what I would like to see in our work, I mean, in the feminist and in the masculinities work, is to really recover and include the gender perspective. I think that we both are supposed to work from this perspective, but as far as I see, we're in March working with women, men, and boys, but we are not really using the gender perspective to try to understand wider and deeper what's happening with this population. I see that there's a lot of reproduction of the binaries, and that we are still all the time talking about that we're going to face these binaries, but we're just reproducing the same perspective. So I think that gender should be in the center, but not only reproducing what has been said, but thinking about the dynamics of gender and how this is related with some other categories, with the intersections with other dimensions. And as I would like to see gender in this broad perspective, I would like to see sexuality too. Because even here, we have had some good discussions about sexuality, but most of the discussion on sexuality is related to gender again. So this is a place in which we have been discussing about the fight against the binaries and not in the other spaces. Because I think that all the different discussions must be approaching this queerness, this diversity of genders, and we haven't done that. So, and it happens at the feminist movement too. So I think that this is the two broad dimensions, gender and sexuality, that we have to achieve and that we have to really reflect on for a better understanding about what's happening. And but we cannot do this if we do not make a kind of balance among the social structure and the intimacy or the personal dimension. Because in some ways, the feminist has run looking for a better understanding of the social structure, and we have lost a lot of the personal environment and the privacy and intimacy. And I see that the masculinities work is much more working on the intimacy and the personal, but they are not taking in account the broad structure. So I think that we have to make a balance on this to really understand all the different sectors and situations that we all are working with. So I think that if we see the work that both movements of both areas are working with, I think that if we try to really build on together new approaches, new discussions, we will maybe contribute to really enrich from each other and to recover this line of transformation that we're looking for. Otherwise, we are in risk of reproducing the same that we are fighting against. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to strike a slightly discordant note, but I think that the state that we are as far as dialogues and discussions are concerned in South Asia, we have yet to really dialogue and open free discussions between different sections of the women's movement. So that's our most urgent need, it seems to me. And where we have talked to masculinity in that sense, the term is with the margins in our society. So we may have had conversations, for instance, with the Dalit men. But I think, personally at least, in terms of experience, masculinity as a question is not something that we have addressed directly. I think urgent need in the context of India has been to talk to groups of people within the range of feminist locations, which has actually been the critical issue as far as we are concerned. Because, say for instance, questions of caste. Questions of caste have been thrown at us by women occupying different positions in the caste hierarchy. And we've had a series of political and social contexts in which this has been urgently pressed upon us. Because historically, questions of affirmative action, for instance, led to very strident strident positions between different groups. And women have been sometimes confused, sometimes less confused, but clearly not sure where they should put their energy. But particularly, they have been held to have not responded sufficiently to the caste question, sufficiently to the specific historical specificity of the location of women across the social hierarchy. So in a fundamental way, we have been asked to think and respond to the long-standing historic injustices which have created particular kinds of marginalities. And those particular kinds of marginalities have not been addressed by the society at large, and even by the early stages of the women's movement. And we were confronted with this harsh reality because we were we were actually asked to be held accountable for the fact that we had not responded. So I think that's an important issue, and dialogues have been forced upon us. We have sometimes risen to the occasion with grace, sometimes with somewhat churlishness, but those have opened up to some extent now. Another area that we haven't, militarization is something that you can talk about, but how do you talk about militarization in the context of nationality movements? Nationality movements have also been very disappointed, I think, with the women's movement, because feminists say, for instance, in Jammu and Kashmir will say, where were you when the sexual violence was happening in Jammu and Kashmir or in the Northeast? And I think in that sense of the term, the margins of the women's movement and the marginalized groups in our societies have actually forced us to rethink our positions and to respond. we have swept this under the carpet under the kind of under the first flush of the idea that as a patriotic country we were democratic, and so we were not responding actually to questions of the desire of the nationality groups for their own autonomy. So we haven't actually rethought questions of sovereignty and questions of national identity. So that's been a big a failure on our part. I'm not sure that those discussions have sufficiently opened up. I think one way in which we've come out onto this is to demand, we have certainly taken positions against militarization, but we've also begun to open up and say we demand accountability from the state, of course, for its violation of the rule of law, but we've also demanded that will hold that is oppositional movements also accountable if, for instance, they have engaged in sexual violence. So that's the kind of thing that we have, to some extent, opened up. We've been more successful, I think, with the sexual choices, sexual orientation movement, partly because maybe it cuts across the class and class divide, and we've been able to respond to that more effectively. But in a fundamental way, I think if we have had dialogues with anybody at all, it has been with the margins in each of these movements. It's the marginalized male, masculinity of all these, along this line, that we have had some dialogues with, and I think that it's not enough thing to carry it forward.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you very much. I am a feminist, but as I said, I'm also a person that belongs to the social movement. So basically, I'm asking one question to the one, and also, in a way, answer maybe for the other one.